Hello again, my name is Steve Stine, and I am going to teach you how to play Moneytalks by AC/DC. I had a request for this one, so I thought I would give this a try. I'm not going to be focusing on the solo. The solo would be a video in itself, obviously, to try and learn that. What I want to do is I want to show you some ideas of how to play the riffs for this song, some different fingering ideas, of course, like I normally do in my videos, different options of things that might be comfortable for you to play. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the main riff, which is that. That thing up there, and then we'll look at the rhythm underneath that and all that sort of thing. So what we're doing here, so we're going to start, I would use my third finger on the 12th fret of the second string. Now the entire time that I'm doing this intro riff, you're playing the third string open as well as all the notes that we're going to be talking about on the second string. So just remember that for this whole little intro piece, you're playing the third and the second strings together with the third string being open, okay? So what we're going to do is put our third finger on that 12th fret. We're going to pluck the 0 of the third string and the 12th fret together. Okay? Then we're going to head down to the 10th fret with our first finger, also on the second string. We're going to do that twice. Now remember, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're stopping the strings in between, so you're not getting... Okay, we want to have some pauses in there. So remember, every once in a while, you're going to have to give a karate chop to stop those strings over on this side. Okay, what I usually do is I just drop my wrist down and I stop those strings from vibrating. Okay, then I'm going to head over to the 13th fret of the second string with my pinky. Okay, so that's our first little riff. Then we're going to go, and in order to do that, we're going to shift outside the position that we're in, which means we're going to have to move. We're going to slide down. We don't want to actually physically hear the slide, but we are going to do the slide. So what happens there is we've got our 12-10, 12-10, then our 13. Now we're going to go back to the 12, go to the 10, but then we're going to move down to the 8. So you'll see what I'm doing is I'm just dropping down with my first finger. I'm playing 3-1-1. So we have... Okay. And if you've never done like single note picking before, of course we're picking two strings here, but I would highly recommend you get used to using one of the fingers on your right hand or two of the fingers to kind of grasp onto the guitar. You know, don't just kind of float out in midair here trying to go like that. Try and actually kind of grab on, get really close to those strings. Always remember, you want to hold the pick closer to the front of the pick. Okay? So the closer I get to the front of the pick, the more control I have. The further back I get, the more the pick's going to want to turn or fall out of my hands or all sorts of different things like that. So I'm right up next to there. That way I don't have to keep looking so much at my right hand. And when I play, I can just feel the same repetitive motion of that pick moving over those two strings at the same time. So now we just did 12, 10, 8. Then what we're going to do is once we're down here on 8, we're going to go back to the 10 with our third finger, and then back to the 8 with the first finger again. So it sounds like this. And that whole thing can ring out. So I have. Okay, so a really fun little riff to play. There's a lot of AC/DC stuff that's really fun to play. If you're not real familiar with playing stuff like, you know, I mean, there's a million bands, but certainly AC/DC, go back to learn some of these songs from the 70s and the 80s and things like that, certainly the 60s as well, to learn about guitar riffing. You know, if you want to get out of just strumming all your chords all the time and things like that, and there's nothing wrong with that either, but these kinds of songs are really fun to learn, so I'm going to keep trying to do a variety of different AC/DC songs for you as well. So we've got... Now the second time around we do exactly the same thing. The only difference is we're going to pluck that 8 twice. Okay, instead of once. So nice and slow. I'm going to play the first round for you. Then the second time, it's exactly the same, except you're going to double up on that 8. Okay? Now, you keep doing that part over and over and over. Now, this is Angus's part. We're going to go back and look at Malcolm's a little bit here, too. But this main part is kind of the fun part to play. So you're going to keep doing that. And then right before you go into the verse, he's going to end on a D chord. So you're going to strum that D chord, so you're coming off. You're going to hit that D chord, and then we go into the main riff. Okay, so we're going to keep going with Angus's part here. Angus and Malcolm's parts both overlap at some point here, but we'll come back to the intro. I just want you to learn this main part for right now. Now, after we hit that D, we're going to head down and start doing this riff. Okay, now there's a variety of different ways that you can play this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how the riff goes, and then we'll talk about some options of things. So what I'm doing here is I'm making a G chord, but because it's rock and roll, and certainly because it's AC/DC, they don't usually make a full G chord like this. In this instance, what I'm doing is I'm using my ring finger, my third finger, on the 6th string at the 3rd fret. And what I'm doing is two things. I'm pressing on that 6th string, and I am also killing the 5th string underneath with the flesh of my index finger. Okay? Because if you think about it, normally when we make a G, we need somebody here, and then we need somebody here on the 2nd fret of the 5th string. Well, in this instance, we don't really want that 2nd fret of the 5th string. And in a lot of AC/DC songs, he does that, and it gives it more of a power chord sound. Even though you're playing an open chord, it still sounds more like a power chord. Because remember, what really makes a power chord is the fact that a power chord doesn't want to sound major or minor. It doesn't want to sound like either one of those. So if we kill this 5th string, it doesn't sound major or minor. It just kind of sounds like a power chord. So what we're doing is taking that 3rd finger, we're pressing on the 6th string, and then we're using the flesh of the 3rd finger underneath to kill the 5th string. And then when you strum, just strum the top 3 or 4 strings. You see? So I don't have anybody on the bottom 2 strings on the 1st and 2nd strings, but I don't want to strum them either. I just want to strum 6, 5, 4, and then possibly 3. I'd like to get 3 in there, but I have to stay away from 2 and 1. Okay? So you have to be a little careful. Again, when you're playing riffs for guitar, you know, it's not this big open strumming thing like this, although we do use that certainly. Sometimes you got to get a little more refined when you strum. You're kind of bashing a little bit more, either from the elbow or from the wrist. They're smaller movements. Okay? So that's what we're doing. Then after we do that, we've got this little guitar riff, or this little lick. And what's happening right there is I'm plucking the 6th string again, but I'm just plucking the 6th string. Then I'm going over to the 5th string, 1st fret, and I'm going to pluck that note with my 1st finger. And then I'm going to do a hammer-on to the 2nd fret of the 5th string with my middle finger. Now remember, a hammer-on is done by picking, in this case, picking the 1st fret of the 5th string and then smacking that middle finger down on the 2nd fret. And ideally what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the 2nd note, which is the hammered note, the hammer-on, to be as loud as the initial note. So you really got to crack that one. Okay, so the 3rd finger is staying here. We're strumming that chord twice. Then we're stopping the strings. And then we're moving on to the lick. So I'm playing the 3 of the 6th string, going to the 1st fret of the 5th string, doing my hammer on to the 2nd fret, and then I'm heading back to the 3rd fret of the 6th string again. So here's the lick. And you see I'm back on the 3rd fret again, obviously, so I can strum again. So there's no pause between the lick and then the strumming again of that chord. You just go right into it. Okay, so that guy's already set up, so you want to make sure that you're pressing on the 3rd fret, but then you're also killing the 5th string underneath. Okay? Now, there's another option of playing that. I want to show you that real quick. You could play it as a power chord if you want to play G as a power chord. You could play that. okay, on the 3rd fret, of course, because we're still playing a G chord. Then you'd run over here and do that lick, and then you'd head back. Okay, so there's lots of different ways we could slide. I mean, there's all sorts of different things, but I just want to give you a couple of options of chord ideas. The best sounding one, and the one I do believe he uses, is this open G chord like this G power chord thing. But, I mean, if it felt more comfortable, by all means, remember my rule. I mean, if it feels better to do it a certain way, even if the artist didn't do it that way, it doesn't make any difference. You're just trying to have some fun and learn how to play some music here. You want to play the notes correctly, obviously, but the position doesn't really make that much difference. Okay, so that's the first thing that you're going to do. Then what you're going to do is you're going to head over here to the 5th fret of the 5th string. You're going to make a power chord. Now we're going to do the same idea that I just showed you. Now we really legitimately have to do this. So we're on the 5th fret of the 5th string making a power chord. So my first finger's on the 5th fret of the 5th string. My 3rd finger's on the 7th fret of the 4th string, and my pinky is on the 7th fret of the 3rd string, making a power chord. So it's real bluesy in nature. I would keep moving the shape around. So what I'm doing is I'm strumming that twice, just like I did on G, stopping the strings. But now I'm going to have to reposition myself to do that lick. So I'm going to take my 3rd finger, place it on the 5th string, 5th fret, and I'm going to do the same lick that I did up here, but now I'm on the 5th string going to the 4th string. So my 3rd finger is on the 5th string here, 5th fret, which means my first finger is going to be on the 3rd fret of the 4th string, and I'm going to do a hammer on to the 4th fret, just like I did here. So it's exactly the same lick, it's just in a different place. Now the trick is you got to move from this power chord to that lick and then back to the power chord again. Now you'll notice what I did there is I just took the power chord, the 5th fret power chord here on the 5th string, and I simply moved back to the 3rd fret and did the exact same lick again. So I'm on the 3rd fret of the 5th string making a power chord. And then when I want to go to that lick, again, it's going to be on the 3rd fret of the 5th string again. We're sharing that note. See how it's the same lick every time? And if you've ever seen any of my instructional videos, I just call this chord chasing, where you're just using a chord and you're just playing the same riff over and over and over, or same concept off of each chord. So the 3 chords used in this song are G, D, and C, which is a 1-4-5 if you know what that is. Real common blues rock and roll kind of thing, and that's what we're using here. So I've got this lick. Head up, 5th fret, then 3rd fret, then you're back on the intro again. Now, the thing to always remember about learning material, learning people's songs, all those sorts of things, is that there's essentially 2 things that you're always working on. You're working on the pieces, and we could call those, pieces, blocks, all kinds of different things, but you're working on those individual pieces. So you're going to work up this G piece, okay? The intro piece, okay? The D piece. You're going to work up all these individual pieces, but the other part is what we'll call the connectors, the connections between each one of those pieces. And to be honest, that's where most people have the hardest time, is not on the individual pieces necessarily, but going from one piece to the next. So as you watch this video, what I want you to watch is how I move from one piece to the next. We need to finish the concept of that piece or that block before we move to the next piece, okay? And the best thing that you could possibly do, obviously, is just take your time. You don't have to play fast. If you're working on trying to get from the G piece to the D piece, and you're going... and you got to get up there. So as soon as you get done, you got to jump up. And you can see how that actually would be very difficult. You know, we can learn the G piece and we can learn the D piece, but then we also have to connect them. And that's where sloppiness can come in when you're practicing sometimes, is that you're trying to connect these pieces. You've learned the piece great and you've learned the next part great, but you're trying to connect them and it's not working. And then you start getting frustrated. You have to understand the best thing you can do is take the entire concept and just slow it down and understand that the connections between the pieces is just as important as the pieces themselves. So when you move from, that's a connection. Now we're going to go into the, then we're going to move to, then I'm going to be down again. See how I went? I did the last half of this piece and the first half of the next piece, which is kind of nice because it all wound up being in the same spot there. Now, come off this, and I got to jump up there. Now, is it possible to leave the pattern that you're on, or the sequence or block or piece or whatever you want to call it? Is it possible to leave that a little early to get up to the next part? Of course it is. You know, your ideal goal is to try and stay there as long as possible before you have to move and still make the whole thing sound smooth. Okay? The goal for our listeners is when they listen to us, that everything just sounds seamless when we move from one place to the next. So we work on the individual components and then we start trying to put those components together. Okay? So that's pretty much all of the rhythm parts for Money Talks. You know, there is that one little riff right before the, or the rhythm right before he goes into the solo. He's playing a D chord and he goes. It's kind of a polyrhythmic thing going on there. And what you're doing is you're just strumming D. I want you to think about this rhythm as I do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what's happening is you're strumming offbeat those three first strums that you're doing, and then the fourth strum you're waiting for the downbeat to come around. So if you can kind of see my leg here, if I was going 1, 2, 3, 4. And start over. Okay, and then the solo begins. And underneath the solo, you're doing the same thing, okay? So that's the entire song summed up for you. Now we have the Malcolm part. I want to go back and do that secondary part in case you have a friend or somebody that could play this other part while you're doing this. What you're going to do is you're going to head down to a D power chord. So we want this D chord, but instead of making the D like this, what we're going to do is we're going to put our middle finger on the second string of the 3rd fret. We're going to put our first finger on the 3rd string, 2nd fret, which is the top part of a D chord. And then we're going to take our ring finger and we're going to put it on the 4th fret of the 3rd string as well. So we have 2 fingers right now in the 3rd string. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to play this note and then we're going to lift it up. Then we're going to play it, we're going to lift it up. Okay? That's what's going on underneath. Malcolm's parts are actually really, really fun and very essential to making the song sound correct. Then what you're going to do is you're going to go over to a C chord, but you're going to take this finger off. Okay? Which is actually kind of like the inside of a G chord, right? So we're going. So it's a C chord without this note, which is kind of like the outside of a G if you think of it that way as well. So. And then here. Then you're going to come over to this note. Okay, so we're playing this 4th fret right here. Okay. Okay. So we have. See that right there? Now after I play this chord, what I'm going to do is head over to the 4th fret of the 3rd string. I'm going to leave this finger here. I'm going to leave that first finger there because I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pluck that note singly, just that 4, and then I'm going to go to the 2nd fret of the 3rd string with my middle finger, and I'm going to do that. So my first finger is still where it was. My second finger is going on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. I'm going to pluck those, and then lift it, And I'm picking all of this. There's no hammer-ons or pull-offs. So I have... And so after I strum this chord right here, I'm going to head over with my pinky, which is that part right there. So which means the second time around I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but I'm going to pluck twice, just like I did here. So I have this now. Okay, does that make sense? Kind of weird, kind of unique. And then... So that's what Malcolm is doing underneath this part right here. And you'll notice a lot of times Malcolm parts are actually kind of more difficult than Angus's parts. Again, just a generalization, but always the important thing is that, and Angus would be the first one to tell you, it's those parts underneath that really stabilize everything else that's on top of that, okay? So that's the basic general idea. Now in the chorus, when you're doing the... Malcolm is underneath just playing chords. He's going to play G, C, then G, D, G, C, G, D, okay? So hopefully that helps you a little bit. You know, again, I'm sorry about the solo. I want to keep these, limited to about 30 minutes on each video as they get kind of complex. So the solo is definitely something that we'd have to talk about externally, but keep sending in your requests, and I'll keep trying to figure out the songs for you and show you the best breakdown that I can and the best understandings of how you can change parts to make them more accessible for you when you play them.